on the authority of Abu Abdurrahman, Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, who said that Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he is the truthful and he is the believed one. He narrated to us, verily the creation of each one of you is brought together in his mother's belly for 40 days in the form of seed. Then he is a clot of blood for a like period, means 40 days. Then a morsel of flesh for a like period, again 40 days. Then there is sent to him the angel who blows the breath of life into him and who is commanded about 4 matters: to write down his means of livelihood, his lifespan, his actions, and whether happy or unhappy. Means whether he would be happy or unhappy in his life. By Allah, other than whom there is no God, verily one of you behaves like the people of paradise until there is but an arm's length between him and it, means the paradise. And that which has been written overtakes him, and so he behaves like the people of hellfire, and thus he enters it. And one of you behaves like the people of hellfire until there is but an arm's length between him and it, means hellfire this time. And that which has been written overtakes, means qadr, takes him, and so he behaves like the people of paradise, and thus he enters it. It was related by Al-Bukhari and Muslim.
Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah amma ba'd. The 4th hadith that Dr. Salim has just read, Jazakallah khairan. On the one hand, it tells us a lot about our aqidah, our belief or creed concerning destiny or predestiny, qadr and qadar. And also it tells us something about our suluk, our spirituality, that a person will be an arm's length away. A person who is considered to be from the person of paradise is 1 arm's length away from paradise, and before his death he does the act of the people of hellfire, and then he enters into hellfire. Na'udhu billahi min dhalik. And a person could be an arm's length away from hellfire, and he does the deeds of the people of paradise and dies upon it, and so he enters paradise. And so what that tells us is that we shouldn't feel so secure from the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I don't mean plan in a nasty way. We shouldn't feel secure from the plan of Allah in terms of our own faith, our own iman, in terms of being overconfident with ourselves or whatever we think we have of righteousness. Because anything that we have of righteousness is actually a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And iman is not something that we gain because we deserved it, but it was given as a gift. And last week I said that I asked the question that should we go into this at some length, and many of you, there was no objection anyway, said yeah, let's dig into it at some depth, because I had already kind of touched upon a few issues, fiqh issues, and one of them was an issue of abortion, and we went into some depth. But there was a really excellent suggestion which said, why don't we go through it generally first, skirt the outlines of what we could basically get, and then let's explore at depth. And we said that we'll do that. So we're going to give it a shot. So this is like an experimental mode. All right, let's see how this works out. This could be a disaster. Well, at least I've got my tea. So let's have a go, inshallah ta'ala. The hadith starts, as we said, with Abu Abdurrahman Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, and he says that I'm going to relate to you what the Prophet said, and he's Sadiq al-Masduq. He is the truthful and the one eminently truthful, and he's the one who should be believed because he is so truthful. And then he relates something which, according to the standard of the times, perhaps not. Perhaps detailed knowledge of this wasn't amongst the Arabs, but it was around the world and around that area, which was that it was thought that when a human being is born between the union of man and woman, that whatever the man injects into the woman, and however the the two conceive of a baby, the baby is born fully formed. The baby is ejected or injected into the womb of the mother, fully formed, but minute. Okay, minute. That was kind of considered the frontiers of science at that time, not empirical science, because you couldn't see that, but it's just assumed, and the baby gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And this idea of fetal stages hadn't occurred to the great minds, scientific minds within the Greek, the Chinese, the Indian, and the Persian civilizations. And what we inherit from classic antiquity is the Greek idea that the fetus is, the child is born, is fully injected into the mother, but at a minuscule size. Okay, it's quite sensible. And then it just grows and grows and grows. And so this comes along, and it's one of the reasons why Ibn Mas'ud may have said that, look, I'm going to narrate to you something from the Prophet ﷺ, and I've narrated 800 odd hadiths in my life. I mean, he didn't say these words, but that's the reality of it. And I haven't really used the word as-sadiq al-masduq about the Prophet ﷺ, except in this occasion. And one or two of the scholars have said the reason why he says that is because this is quite an awesome hadith in terms of going against the determined views, the scientific views of the time. So that's why it's possible. That's why it's said. And some of you have asked in the past, why do I say a lot of things with degrees of uncertainty? It's because, one, it's not permissible to be absolutely certain about something in which there is a valid difference of opinion. And if I'm certain about it, you should. If I come across as being certain about it, you should understand that it's possible that Abu Aliyah's view is not the end view. There might be more to it. He may not even know it, and that's likely. Although, if I'm going to teach, I'm going to make sure that I thoroughly understand, both sides, or encompass the issue. Otherwise, one shouldn't teach at all. And that'd be treacherous if one taught without sufficient knowledge. And one of the calamities of the time is that we're so adamant. I recently read, and I know I've already gone off track, but I recently read online someone who I actually I have a great fondness of, the author of this book and many other books, Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan. And they've translated one of his fatwas, and it's possible that's exactly how he said it. That any person, and actually he's talking about talib al-ilm, a seeker of religious knowledge, but he generalized it. Any person who doesn't have who cuts from his beard, trims his beard, and even if it's like beyond a fistful, okay, and you trim he can't be a talib al-ilm, can't be a student of knowledge, can't be following the sunnah. And so that's kind of been translated on a few websites, and then it gets sent to other websites, and then you get people discussing this. And it's just a tragedy. Why? Because it's not that scholars don't have the right to take a scholarly view. And there's the scholarly view that when the Prophet ﷺ says, grow your beard and trim your moustache, and he uses, at least in the authentic hadith in Bukhari and Muslim, he uses 3 or 4 different Arabic words for grow. Grow, let flow, okay? Let flow your beard. And from there, a group of scholars, and it's one of the opinions of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, say that the sunnah is to let the beard flow. And when you let something flow, just let it flow. And that's a valid opinion. And you'll find some of the great scholars, their beards, mashallah. It's narrated in the Tabaqat of Ibn Sa'ad of Ibn Sa'ad rahimahullah, that when he's describing Ali radiallahu anhu, that Ali radiallahu anhu's beard, okay, you can imagine this on a battlefield, yeah? His beard widthwise was shoulder length. Now, I'm not a broad person. Ali radiallahu anhu was broad. His width of his beard was almost shoulder length, and it was, kathra, it was really long. So you can imagine meeting this person wielding a double-edged sword, Dhul Fikar. He had a sword with two blades on it. And though he's not a tall man like Umar radiallahu anhu, but he's like ready for subhanallah. Okay. So that is a valid opinion. But to say whoever trims from their beard, okay, anything, it can't be a serious student of knowledge, that doesn't seem to be helpful in terms of Muslim unity and teaching Muslims tolerance in legitimate differences of opinion. Why? Because the more dominant view is that when Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, it's in Sahih Bukhari, he relates the words of the Prophet ﷺ, grow, flow your beard, okay, grow your beard and trim your moustache and be different than the Majus or the Mushriks. Be different from the Mushriks, the idolaters. And Ibn Umar, who hears this hadith, and Ibn Umar, who is such a detailed imitator of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet ﷺ would undo his top button, winter and summer, Ibn Umar would do it, even if it's not a sunnah in that sense. The Prophet ﷺ would have two straps on his sandal, which is not a sunnah as such. Ibn Umar will only wear sandals with 2 straps. The Prophet ﷺ would have this type of food and would refrain from that type of food. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu would do exactly the same. Okay, that's mimicking. And yet Ibn Umar narrates this hadith. I heard the Prophet ﷺ say, grow your beard, trim your moustache and be different than the idolaters. And Ibn Umar, he would, when he went to Hajj or Umrah, he would grab a fistful and whatever exceeded the fistful, he would trim from it. So meaning keep the beard a fistful. So when the Prophet ﷺ says flow the beard, because Ibn Umar did this, and he's the narrator of the hadith, and he has a very strong affinity to following the Prophet ﷺ in every detail, then we understand, according to the majority of scholars, that the sunnah is that you don't let it grow, or you shouldn't let it grow, more than a fistful. So to say that anyone who takes from their beard, okay, is not a student of knowledge, that's just it's asking for it. It's asking to make Muslims intolerant. Now, if it's just between 2 scholars, right, and they're having a, mashallah, you can say what you want. But once the masses hear it, and sometimes the masses, they become they get very excited when a scholar says something with really strong voice. Must be serious. Scholar said, you're not even a student of knowledge. You must be serious. These people aren't really students of knowledge. These people aren't even proper Sunni Muslims, if they're taking from... Then no, because as a scholar, the scholar should know, and I dare say, I have no shak that this particular scholar knows, that there are other views. There is even a view that actually, as long as you fulfill the obligation of differing from the idolaters, then even if the beard is below a fistful, that's also a legitimate minority opinion. 2 legitimate minority opinions that as long as you can pull it, it's significant, but it's not necessarily that long, a fistful long, but it will do. It will show the difference. And the other minority opinion that you should just let it flow. And then what seems to be the more dominant opinion is that one aims for the fistful, or at least not to touch it if it doesn't reach a fistful, because you get like Chinese Muslims and certain West African Muslims, certain Afro-Caribbean Muslims who quite often they don't have much on their chin. It's related about Al-Bukhari, rahmatullahi alayhi, Bukhara, the Russian regions, the Uzbeki regions, that he didn't have much of a beard. Okay, and that's not because he trimmed or anything, it's just that's the way it was. But what I'm trying to say is, if we want intolerance to continue, then that's exactly what we should do. And many people do it anyway. Oh yeah, this is the opinion, And then, if you're a teacher, have students, or you are influential over young people, you will nurture in young people levels of intolerance. And for some of those young people and society, those intolerances will reach certain destructive levels. And therefore, you are not a teacher, you are betraying the trust of teaching. So quite often in an open gathering, when the teacher, in this case me, follows a particular fiqh school, which is hardly followed at all, it's the Hanbali school, it's the minority of minorities. So it makes no sense for me to keep banging on about the Hanbali school only, when the majority is going to be either Hanafi or Shafi'i, not even Maliki. Okay. Secondly, most people are not formal students of knowledge who can go and check the Arabic books and this, that, and the other and follow up this, that, and the other. No. Thirdly, where most of us are hopefully aiming for knowledge which will benefit us in the grave, in the akhirah. And to have a little bit more just to kind of season the cake, that's nice, but nothing too much. And that's more realistic. And therefore, when there is a difference, and it's a valid difference, remember I qualify it with the word sa'ir, valid. then it's not for me to come down on one opinion. If I do, then I don't intend that this is it, but it's just that I'm only going to say one opinion for the circle. But quite often, if it's one of those things that are causing controversy in society, like the Mawlid, like the Milad al-Nabi issue that Dr. Salim and I tackled a few weeks ago here, then we just laid it out. Even though our opinion is this, these are the two legitimate opinions, and we try to make you understand the more subtle majority opinion of why it's allowed to celebrate it yearly, even though that's not my opinion or Dr. Salim's opinion. We consider it's not permissible to celebrate it yearly, even if it's just, you know, singing some nasheeds or whatever, like that, on that day. But the point being is, ulama have said it's allowed, and they have a basis. And it's not that we don't follow ulama. It's not that, oh, the ulama's word, the words of the scholars are the be-all and the end-all. In the end, the be-all and the end-all is the book and the sunnah, is revelation. But we can only understand some of the details of revelation through these qualified scholars. We can only understand some of the detail, or much of the details of revelation through qualified scholars. As regards to the generality of revelation, be kind, smile, don't steal, speak truthful, be kind to your parents, pray 5 times a day, remember death, don't drink, then we don't need scholars. The words of Allah and the Messenger are clear cut in themselves in those general statements that even a non-Muslim, if they heard them, they probably will get the idea what Islamic beliefs and ethics are about. But the details, okay, why does this mosque, when we line up for prayer, we line up for prayer and we miss out that row where the pillar is. You'll find there's all these lines, and then a whole line that could have been formed, it is not formed, and then after the pillar there is another line. Why is that? When we kind of got the idea that shouldn't we be filling up all the spaces first? Well, there's a whole space. Why is that? Anybody?
Well, in this space, there's Satan appears there. The Satan comes if there's a gap between the, Musallin, when they're, standing for the prayer.
Yeah, not so much that. I'm talking about when the whole line is left to obviously to avoid the pillar. Why can't we form all right, so there's a gap, you're right, but it's just one small gap, and it's because there's a pillar there.
Yeah.
It's not purposely left.
Yeah.
So why do we do it? Obviously, you're right, because there's a gap, but there's something more specific to that than that.
Because Safbandi is not complete,
Yeah, it's not so much that. It's because there is a hadith. Scholars differ about how strong a proof it is and what it actually implies, but speaks about keeping away from forming a line where there is a pillar, precisely because it breaks the unity of the Muslims in the terms of appearance. So there is a hadith that is acted upon by some scholars, not acted upon by others, not because they don't believe, it's because they don't see that to be the case from what that hadith is saying. Point being is, if I didn't know that, and a lot of people don't know, okay, if we did form gaps, if we did form a line there, someone will say, oh, you're going against the sunnah. You're not going against the sunnah. You're going against one particular understanding of a hadith. That's hardly the sunnah. That's an understanding of the hadith. It's really important we understand this. I cannot tell you how devastating things can be when, with lack of knowledge, we become hard on one particular opinion to the degree that we will hold negative views, ideas, or attitudes against other Muslims. If, however, you are hard on a particular opinion and you don't hold negative views, and you, in your heart of hearts, you know that there are other valid opinions, but this is the one I'm going to cling to with my molar teeth, alhamdulillah, that's probably the best way you should follow Islam. So there's not a problem of being really tough on your opinion. The problem is when the heart begins to feel that other people, they're wrong, they're misguided, they're deviant, they're dodgy, they're opposing the sunnah, SubhanAllah, no amount of talking about unity is going to solve that problem. Okay? And the resultant end of that is you get people who will then start commanding the good and forbidding the evil, even physically, okay, in society, right? And they will be causing immense destruction. Because when the Prophet tells us, reject the evil, change it with your hand, change it with your tongue, he's talking about something which is clear-cut evil, where there is no difference of opinion about that it is wrong. Not where some scholars say it is right and some scholars say it is wrong. Then it doesn't become a munkar, a clear-cut evil in that respect. And that is a legacy that is handed down to us from the earliest of scholars, from the Salaf. So it's really important. So here, Sadiq al-Masduq, some scholars say Ibn Mas'ud says it for this reason, because what he's saying is going against the grain of natural scientific knowledge of the time. And then we're given the stages, okay? And we talked about abortion, and I don't really want to talk about that again. And then at some point, the majority opinion is at 120 days. This ruh, this spirit or soul is somehow injected or infused into the fetus. Allah commands the angel to do that. And the angel does that, and we don't know how, and neither do we know very much about the ruh. يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ عَمْرِ رَبِّي وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. They asked you concerning the ruh, concerning this spirit or this soul. الرُّوحُ مِنْ عَمْرِ رَبِّي. This ruh is from the command of my Lord. وَمَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلٌ. And of knowledge, you've only been given a little. O mankind, don't try to philosophize or use rationality or logic on every single thing that moves and blinks. Because of knowledge, you've only been given little. Do your best. Scholars are scholars, non-scholars are non-scholars, but there are going to be some things outside of your kith and kin, out of your perception, out of your understanding. It's just beyond you. The ruh is one of these things. Yes, scholars may work to define what could be meant by the ruh. They all agree ruh is this life-giving substance which courses through the body of man, and that's how Al-Ghazali or Ibn al-Jawzi or Ibn Hajj al-Asqalani or Ibn al-Qayyim begin to define ruh. But they all know that these are vague attempts, okay, at getting to the bottom of something which they can't get to the bottom of, but at least we know what we're talking about when we say ruh. When we say ruh, we're not talking about the nafs as such, we're talking about this life-giving force that when it's out of us, khalas. And we've been taught in the Quran and Hadith that the ruh, this life-giving substance, comes out of the body on two occasions. The first occasion is the occasion of? Oh, mashallah, that was the second one I was going to say. Mashallah, you got it. First occasion is sleep, and second occasion is proper death. Okay? So the ruh leaves the body and goes wherever it goes, however it goes, in the way it goes, and that's called Maut al-Sughra. That's kind of the smaller death that happens every night for most people. Right, for vampires, no, we exclude this. And the Maut al-Kubra, the great death, is when the ruh is permanently taken out of the body. Okay? But we don't know more than that, and it's mashallah, it's one of God's mysteries. Alhamdulillah, but it's fantastic that we have this kind of ruh, which may not give us just life, it might even give us the very notion of being human. And we don't, that's all we really know. And the angel then writes down these things. Our livelihood. What was the other before? Our livelihood, our lifespan, and our actions, and whether we're going to be happy or not. Okay, our psycho-spiritual state, whether we're going to be like miserable creatures or happy creatures kind of thing. And I'm sure most angels have written down that people in the 21st century West, they're generally going to be miserable, but don't worry, the media industry is going to make many things, from games and from video games, from movies, to try to make you happy for that 2 hours, 2.5 hours, before you become miserable again. Right, okay? Because really, the state of depression and the state of anxiety that modernity brings about is unlike anything that has passed in pre-modern history. It's not that people didn't suffer and things like that. It's the type of depth of anxiety and unhappiness unhappiness in the presence of wealth, you'd think it's not a proper equation. You'd think wealth, abundant wealth, must equal happiness. And that's the deen, the religion, or at least the philosophy that we've been told since the European Enlightenment. Since at least the 17th century, if not the Renaissance, the 14th century onwards. But definitely by the modern era, it's like, get this piece of tech, get that, and you'll be really happy. I mean, you'll be jumping for joy when you got your dishwasher. Fantastic, you'll be jumping for joy with your Hoover. You'll be jumping for joy with your mobile phone. And you really jump for joy for those few days or hours. And then there is a lot of, and one of the proofs of anxiety and depression is look at how much medicine for depression the United States and Western Europe, including the UK, have to dish out to people on a daily basis. Whether it's Prozac, what's our version of Prozac? Is there a particular version of Prozac?
Yeah, quite. The
Prozac is also okay. So we have
it's called citalopram.
Citalopram. There you are. So we have dhikr. We have dhikr. Okay, the believers have dhikr. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. That's not to deny that there are physical reasons why people will be depressed. Okay, that's not to deny medical reasons. But really, subhanallah, the tatma'innul qulub, okay, for many people in the West today is Prozac. Indeed, in Prozac there is, you're going to find satisfaction. You will until you need the next, your next dose, right? So, please, keep, bear those things in mind, that more than anything, Islam comes to make you rethink how you're living life. It doesn't necessarily want to be counterculture. Society's doing that, go and do the opposite. No, it's not. It doesn't do that on purpose. But it says actually, most of society, وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. But most of mankind, they don't know. And this phrase is repeated in the Quran time and again, time and again. Okay, and it's not just the people who can't read and write who are la ya'lamun. It's the people who are highly educated who are also la ya'lamun, who don't know. They don't know clear realities. They don't know how to control their nafs. They don't know how to be sincere to people. It's always agenda driven. And Islam comes to shape our minds and hearts. So it says, look, you know what? Your rizq, your provisions, your ajal, your lifespan, your amal, your actions, and whether you're going to be shaqi or sa'id, whether you're going to be miserable or happy, all of that is written. So there is a qadr, there is a decree, a pre-decree that has already happened. The angels write it with permission of Allah, and Allah had already told the pen to write all of these things for every single creature in the Lawh al-Mahfuz 50,000 odd years before He created creation. So in the one hadith of the son of Abu Dawud, the Prophet ﷺ said that the very first thing Allah created is the pen. There is also the opinion that the arsh is the first thing. But this hadith says the very first thing Allah created is a pen, and He told it, uktub, write. And He said, what shall I write? Write all that is to be of destiny. So everything was written. My lifespan, your lifespan, right? Everything. And Allah has measured. So this decree, when we say qadr is, we call it decree or destiny, but it's like a measure. Everything has been measured. My life has been measured precisely. And this is how much I'll get, no more, no less. My sustenance has been measured precisely. Allah has measured it out, knows it, has measured it out, has written it down, that's to be, no more, no less. And qadr just requires Muslims to know 4 basic things. Then all the other questions we can really get into. 4 basic things. I must believe in qadr, obviously, but I must believe that qadr is that Allah knows everything. I must believe in Allah's total and absolute knowledge of generalities and details. It's not just He knew that Abu Aliyah was going to come into the masjid and he was going to wear something warm because it's snowing. Allah knows and knew, in pre-eternity, that exactly what I'm going to wear, down to the last atom. Allah's knowledge is absolutely in detail. Okay? Which is why, and not all Christians read the Bible, this particular biblical passage like this, but some do, less so now, more so in the past, that when God created creation, and kind of looked at it and thought, it's not really worked out really well. I kind of planned something and it came out the other way. So what I'll do is I'll drown them all in a flood, Noah's flood, and I'll start creation anew. And the Bible says the reason why is because like God looked at creation, it was like, oh no, this is not what was meant to be happening. We don't believe that. I mean, whether the flood was universal, all of the world, which is biblical, though that Quran is not categorical, it's universal, and there is good proof to show it was local. But whether it's local or universal, that's beside the point. The greater issue is Allah doesn't kind of make a mistake. You can make a mistake when you don't have perfect knowledge, right? I don't have perfect knowledge, so I thought I'll get this phone. I did all my research. I thought I'll get, but the phone doesn't. Oh, you know what? It doesn't work in the snow, right? That happens only because you don't have perfect knowledge. But if you have perfect knowledge, you can't make that kind of mistake. Because your knowledge is perfect. You'll know it's not going to work in the snow, so don't buy it when you live in Iceland. Not the shop, the country. Because geography is really poor today, right, in schools and colleges. And Iceland people might know. Anyway. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows everything. So that's the first part of Qadr. One of 4 parts of Qadr. We must know that. So Allah knows everything. Azaliyan, in pre-eternity. Secondly, Allah has written everything. Everything He's written in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, in the preserved tablet. وَهُوَ عِنْدَهُ فَوْقَ الْعَرْشِ, as one hadith says, and is with Him above the throne. Thirdly, so He's written everything. He knows everything. He's written everything. Thirdly, that nothing, Allah is the creator of all things. Allah is the creator of everything. And when we say Allah is the creator of everything, it means that Allah creates our actions as well. Allah is the creator of our actions as well. Allah created you and all that you do, the Quran says. So not just Allah created heavens and earth, Allah created you and all that you do. So actually, whatever human beings do, so whether my mum, inshallah, is going to send to me a kebab roll, right, with my wife, because my family is over there and my mother says, oh, let me send something for my son, okay, then if she sends that, then that's something that Allah has written, Allah knew already, and Allah somehow created the act of my mum to get that kebab roll over to me. Allah creates everything. And fourthly, nothing happens except by the will of Allah. If Allah wills, it happens. If Allah does not will, it does not happen. Those 4 things are an obligation to know. Now, if I can't fit them together in a nice jigsaw to make me understand Qadr, it doesn't matter. As long as I know everything has been preordained, because Allah knows everything. Allah has written everything. And that Allah is in control of everything, because Allah is the creator of everything, and nothing. And if Allah wills, it happens. If Allah doesn't will, it doesn't happen. So Allah is in charge. Okay, Allah is predestined. Allah is in charge, and that doesn't go against the belief, iman, in the fact that I am not compelled to do a deed. Allah is the creator of our actions. That's one thing. That's Aqidah. No Muslim is allowed to deny that. Nor is any Muslim allowed to be ignorant of that level of knowledge of Allah. And yet, on the other hand, no human being is compelled to do an action. There is no jabr, no compulsion from Allah. Allah can't compel you to do something and then you do something wrong and then He punishes you from it and He forces you to do it. What kind of benevolent God is that? follow the argument. We can't be compelled to do something. If a human being chooses to have faith, iman, or deny iman, kufr, if a person chooses to do a righteous deed or a wrong deed, if a person decides to save a life or take a life, it's his choice. It's his choice. And the buck stops with him. He is the morally responsible agent. And based upon his ikhtiyar, his choice, Allah will reward him for the good that he will do, and Allah will punish him for the bad that he will do. If we were compelled to do bad, and the Quran talks about whoever does bad will be punished, that's kind of unjust. And we don't ascribe any injustice to Allah. So, however the equation is squared, however the circle is squared, Allah is the creator of actions, and Allah has predestined actions. Allah knows what's going to happen, and yet man has a free choice. Man has free will and a choice. If we can't join the two bits together, we think, how does that happen? It doesn't matter. Allah does not oblige us to do so. If you can, alhamdulillah, join the small group of merry men who were Islam's theologians. But they are a small group of merry men. Otherwise, the rest of us, we've lived with the comfortable, undoubtable knowledge that Allah decrees everything, and yet man has a choice. Allah creates everything, but man has a choice. Alhamdulillah. And we're not asked to kind of square that circle. And that's fine. One can look like that, because destiny, or qadr, as the Aqidah books say, is a sir min asrarillah, is a secret from the secrets of God. And it's secret from the secrets of God's rububiyyah, of God's, of how God works in creation. And why should we, man with his small intellect, with his small rational faculty, why should man be privy to such mysteries with such a small intellect? In modern science being so modern science, for those of you doing science, you'll probably know that it's divided into two broad sessions: classical science, or at least classical physics, and you have post-classical physics or modern physics. Classical physics is anything Newtonian backwards, anything before quantum physics. And then quantum physics changes the game. Well, one of the things that quantum physics tells you, and it's something that's gone back for over 100 years, okay, is that, and it really doesn't matter how they explain it, an electron or a photon or some subatomic particle, Young's double slit experiment, it seems to have gone, the same one electron seems to have gone through two slits at the same time without dividing. And they still puzzle over that today. And because of that one factor, I mean, it's not because of just that one, but it is one of the foundational issues which gives us modern technology and makes us the modern world that we are today. And yet you can't explain it. How does that happen? You have Copenhagen interpretation of how that happens. How does one photon, a particle of light, one electron, okay, go through two slits at the same time without dividing? And if you watch it, it goes through one slit. If you don't watch it, it somehow ends up going through two slits. And it knows when it's being watched. These are all puzzles. If that happens down in just the quantum world, okay, in the subatomic world, well, why not with God? Okay, that's not a pure justification. All it's just saying is that modern science is quite used to working with end results in quantum physics, even though they don't understand the philosophy behind what actually is happening at that level. Okay, and that's something which anyone who studied it will know that's the case. So those four things must not make us forget that we have choice. We are morally responsible agents. And that's why the Prophet says, when qadr is mentioned, then withhold from speaking about it. When destiny is mentioned, withhold from speaking about it, meaning that if you don't get it, don't delve into it anymore. Because if you didn't get it the first time, it's likely that you're not going to get it. Just be comfortable with the 4 points there, and with the other point that man has a choice, a free will. If someone says, well, how does that work? That's just how it is. We are morally responsible agents, but whatever we do, Allah knows it, Allah recorded it, Allah willed it to be, and Allah is the creator of that action. And if Allah doesn't create an action, it doesn't happen. If Allah doesn't will an action, it doesn't happen. And whatever is not written it doesn't happen. Okay? That's the jalaliness of Allah. SubhanAllah. When we say Allahu Akbar, I mean that Akbar bit has got a lot in there. And part of developing in Iman, growing in Iman, spiritually developing, is that every day, and if not every day, at least every week, this Allahu Akbar becomes even more perplexing to us. Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Because why? We're thinking of, we're trying to understand, or at least root into our hearts, this the greatness of Allah's af'al, the af'alur Rabb, the divine acts. Whoa, that is awesome. That you created a cosmos 15,000 million years ago. So wide. And we're just a speck. We're just a speck. Down to the subatomic world, to the macro cosmological world. There's just a lot going on. Down to the creatures. And some buffoon is going to come and tell me it's all by chance. So, in reality, as long as a Muslim knows that, those things, alhamdulillah, he's got Iman bil Qadr. Iman bil Qadr is so important that we read in the first hadith in Sahih Muslim that a group of the Tabi'un come to Ibn Umar and they say, oh Abu Abdurrahman ibn Umar, there are a group of people in Basra somewhere who deny Qadr. And he says, do not give my salams to them. And these people are deviant off track. Don't give my salams to them. Okay. And then he goes and relates a hadith which mentions Qadr. Okay. So it's a fundamental belief. Any questions so far on that? 4 things. Allah knows everything, Allah has written everything, Allah creates everything, and whatever Allah wills happens, whatever Allah doesn't will does not happen. And that our destinies have all been written. We get as much as we get, and our lifespans as long as they are being written. However, since we don't know it, we haven't seen the book, the Lawh al-Mahfuz, we just act as if nothing's been written. So I don't say as a Muslim, this is totally not a Muslim way to behave. Well, I could have dinner at home, and maybe there is no dinner at home. So I'll just stay here, motionless. Maybe Allah has written that I will pass my exams. You know, GCSEs are happening, A-levels are around the corner, okay? Maybe Allah will if I work hard, maybe Allah will allow me to pass my exam. Maybe that's written. But maybe it's written that I'll fail, even if I try hard. Oh, so then I'll just won't be bothered. No. Tie your camel and trust in Allah. Use the worldly asbab, use the worldly means, knowing that these are given and created by Allah. They have no effect in and of themselves, but they are the means that we're supposed to use to arrive at whatever. Set up your business, but don't go and set it up in a place where, I don't know, halfway down Leytonstone High Road where, 30 shops in a row are all boarded up. That's hardly the best place to start your business, and it's the place where the buses least stop, where you're going to get your trade. No, if you're going to think about it. And that doesn't go against Qadr. Okay? So that's really the package, and we don't have to tie all the loose ends as long as we get the issue. Is that... Let's have a question on this.
Sorry, in order. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just pointed.
Go on.
Okay.
You should have said that was decreed.
I thought actually, up until you started tonight, I'd actually understood this concept.
Okay.
After much deliberating for many years,
Okay.
I finally thought about, I think about 18 months ago, when we took to sleep. I thought I finally understood it, and the way I reconciled it was, yes, Allahu Akbar, Allah is in control of everything, but insan, we engine, have been given this free will, and as a result of being given this free will, is why we judged according to whether do we good or bad. Otherwise,
Absolutely.
if you do this to me and my legs, and then say, you haven't gone to work, Hassan,
Exactly.
or tie me up outside. They said, why didn't you make Isha when you were just outside? Because I said,
Absolutely.
but, you tied me up. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we've been given this free will. But the way I reconciled it was the kind of bit is that Allah has knowledge of what you're going to do, not because He actually compels you to do it.
Okay. Those two things are right. Allah has knowledge of what you're going to do, not because He compels you to do it. But in order to be Aqidah sound, we'd have to say Allah has knowledge, and that we couldn't do it without Allah creating the act. Allah is a creator. Allah created you and what you do. And it doesn't happen except with the will of Allah. If Allah didn't will it, it wouldn't happen.
Even that bit I can reconcile. In other words, yes, I'm going to go from here. I'm going to punch.
I've been quite.
There's some Freudian psychology going on.
But yes, it will only happen still with the will of Allah. Even though I've intended it, I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk up to Dr. Salim, and I'm going to punch him on the nose. But I believe it will only still happen if Allah wills. Otherwise, I will not be able to move.
Absolutely.
Something will happen.
That's exactly right.
This will happen. That we understand as well. But
But
as soon as you put this, what was it now?
Free will.
No. Free will's fine. Allah has knowledge of it is fine. Allah's
the creator of the action.
The creator of the action bit. Then he just threw it all away again.
Right, okay. So if you just put the, if you kept.
Let me just add one point.
Okay.
Actually, we'll have to stop here because this is a question. Is a very old question and appearing like a contradiction. But both points are supported by the ayat. It is written in Quran that nothing happens without the permission of Allah and the knowledge of Allah. And again, you have got a free will. I was reading an answer to this question given by Mr. Fethullah Gulen of Turkey.
Okay, yeah.
You know, he has given a very elaborate and very lengthy answer, but yet is not the answer. In fact, here we got to stop. It's not that you can really give a clear-cut answer to this. But what are you, then let me ask, question your question. But why are you asking this question? Because you are trying to understand Allah with your knowledge?
Which is why,
Yeah.
which is why to put it together.
Yeah. So here we got to stop here and think that yes, these are the designs of Allah. Allah is the one who doesn't have past, present and future. The total ship is in front of Allah. So He is planning, we cannot even comprehend or perceive. The very context is different. I am looking at it from my point of view, and his point of view is very different. We can aspire or ask Allah to give us enough knowledge or a bit of knowledge from Him so that we can some bit understand. The way Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu says, my understanding about Allah is that I don't understand anything about Allah. So why should we really bargain to really understand it from my point of view? So it's not really possible.
Okay, so let's stop that there, because remember this was the simple bit. We had a more complicated bit coming. Remember this is the simple bit, yeah? Two things, mashallah, spot on, which is why the hadith, when qadr is mentioned, withhold from speaking. Meaning, it's not withhold from speaking anything about qadr, because there are ayats about qadr. It means that when you get into this, well, how do you kind of make it all fit? Don't worry, don't make it all fit, because this is Allah's sir. This is the secret, is with Allah. And we cannot encompass the, as they say in English, the divine mind. It's not a very Quranic phrase, but we can't encompass Allah's knowledge. Allah encompasses everything. Okay, so yes, with your thing, it's not a problem. Don't be too worried. As long as you don't throw that, I know of course you won't, but as long as you don't throw that thing that Allah is the creator of actions, okay, of our actions, everything else is spot on. All you have to do is just bring that car, park it with the rest of your 2 or 3 cars, and alhamdulillah, but don't think too much about Allah is the creator of our action car, just khalas, just know it. Okay, and then it's fine, it's absolutely fine. Alex.
it is a difficult concept.
Absolutely.
To grasp.
It's one of the first concepts that people
And I think as Muslims, we can just, even though we struggle to understand it, we can just use faith and accept it.
absolutely,
If
and
you're-
that is
That's what we
perfect.
can do.
Yeah, but if you're having dialogue with non-Muslims, like
Oh,
today,
perfect.
I was talking to my uncle who's non-Muslim, and he's just obviously telling, we were talking about qadar because he was mentioning it, and he's like, well, you believe that it was written, everything, only Allah guides to Islam as well. I'm not a Muslim. That's your God's fault, and I'm struggling. I'm struggling to how to deal with it, and then obviously I'm going to die. It's just him speaking. I'm going to die non-Muslim, and your God's going to send me to hell because I don't believe in one God. I don't
So
believe
he's
in
also
Muhammad.
unjust.
So what sort of and this is your loving God? You keep telling me he's merciful, 99 parts for the day of judgment, 1 part for this. It's like, and I'm like, well, I can't square it. I can't square it for me, and I definitely can't square it for him. So how do we deal with?
All right,
the
you see
non-Muslims?
Alex's question? Alex's question is more or less the normal question that most Muslim scholars end up facing, or have ended up facing, from almost the beginning of the prophetic era. However, just on a side point, when we confine ourselves, I just live amongst Muslims, I just work amongst Muslims, I just check Muslims, and I don't even want to, then, this question would never come up. Why do people think about this? Why are scholars getting into all of this? It's simple. I just have faith and da-da. Yeah, that's fine when you don't have to engage wider society. But since Islam is not a ghetto religion, and it's also a dawah religion, evangelical, it wants to spread the healing and the truth to as many people as possible, we're going to get these natural human questions, even if the devil has kind of whispered here or there, or whatever. But it's the natural human questions. And therefore, from the very beginning, our theologians began to address this idea. So here's the detail, and some of it will include your question. Here's the detail. Just as an exploration, as a kind of academic thing. If we didn't understand any of what I'm going to say, it doesn't matter, because what I said before, the 4 points of qadr and free will, and then beyond that, leave qadr, and just know that we are responsible for what we do, okay? That's enough.
You start on that, the 2 hands raised, so just take the question and just get them all together.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Go
Same
ahead.
question that the guy asked. Same
That's
question.
good.
Okay, Alex's question,
It's
okay?
okay, the same question my brother asked, but it's not answering the
Alhamdulillah,
question.
that's
The
good.
question is not
Okay,
answered.
so now we can go into detail. Any other questions?
I'm gonna add over here.
The question is not
Everything is
answered, sorry. The
sorry,
question
brother.
is not answered still.
Yeah, we come to that in a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Last
Okay.
thing, so one more thing I'm to add over here is like if everything is written in Lawh al-Mahfuz, and whatever is written, all the actions has been written, then why people say that when you do a dua, it can change your fate, it can change it.
Excellent.
Right.
Absolutely. Dua, the authentic hadith says, dua repels qadr.
Yeah.
And what it means by repelling qadr is repelling something not nice. So, for example, I might get a flu, or I might lose I'm on the verge of losing my wealth. Oh, Allah, protect me from flu, protect my wealth. And inshallah, Allah will can answer that dua, and then it wouldn't happen. And so the Prophet used the word, dua repels qadr. All of these things still come under the thing. If the circle can't be squared, there's no religious reason why it has to be. And actually, faith is not weakened by not being able to rationalize the different strands. Faith is weakened if we actually have doubt about these fundamental things. That's the point I'm trying to get across, which is why I said to the brother, as long as he knows those things, his faith is, mashallah, is not harmed at all. It's doubting any one of those 4 things and doubting that maybe Allah does compel us, then that's negative impact on faith. But affirming these things, okay, not being able to actually put them all into a beautiful equation, it really doesn't matter from that rational aspect at all. Why? The proof is the revelation is there. The Prophet ﷺ is there for 23 years. And Qadr is one of the early beliefs. It's not like revealed 2 years after Hijrah. It's from the beginning. And he ﷺ doesn't tell us anything about how to square the circle. And the Sahaba are quite happy with that faith and conviction. However, what happens is that by the second generation of Muslims, when Islam spreads out of Makkah and Medina and the Arabian Peninsula, you come across the Byzantine civilization. It's a Christian, Eastern Christian civilization. You come across the Persian civilization. Now in Byzantine, they're Christians. And the Christians, over 400 or 500 years in the Mediterranean, have embraced various philosophies, especially Greek philosophy, especially Greek Aristotelian philosophy, into their creed and into their religious beliefs. And then you have the Persians, who you have Zoroastrian, Manichaean ideas, ideas that possibly there could be a creator of good and a creator of evil, to independent create. And then you have these ideas. And so what happens is you're getting Muslims from the Byzantine area, you're getting people embracing Islam from the Persian place, you're getting people from, and they're carrying these beliefs. And then they come across, well, oh, so Qadr, how do you do that? Well, if God knows everything, and he's a creator of actions, and he created your actions, so you don't actually have a choice. And if you don't have a choice, then that's a bit worrying, but even more worrying that if you don't have a choice, and then you do something wrong, which Allah compelled you to do, and then he's going to punish you for something that you were compelled to do in the first place. And that's like unjust. And so what happens is that the project of Aqidah, of theology, Aqidah as a science, develops to answer these challenges. It's not that everybody has to know it, but there has to be enough people in society, enough Muslim scholars in society, that they can answer these doubts at some level. Now, the best way to answer it is just to say, look, oh Persian friend, oh Byzantine friend, it's in the Quran. But they're not Muslims, so they don't have the Quran as an authority. Okay, so what? We can go to Persian tradition, but Persian tradition isn't an authority for a Byzantine, and nor a Byzantine for a Persian. But what tends to be a more universal authority is aql, intellect, logic, rationality. And it doesn't matter where you're from, people tend to accept logical arguments, whatever that word logical argument or rational argument means. So then what happens is you get people trying to deal with it. The first set of people that tried to deal with it were people outside of the orthodox Muslim tradition. People called the Mu'tazilite. The Mu'tazilite. They came across like this, and their thing was this: we're going to rationalize these beliefs because Allah gave us an aql. And they had embraced Aristotelian theology or philosophy to the max. And they thought, well, that was the truth, and the Quran is the truth, therefore they all match. And they said, look, Allah is omnibenevolent. Allah is all good. Allah is all just. Therefore, there's no way that he could create a wrong action in someone and then punish him. There's no way that he could create a wrong action in someone, create the action of not praying, create the action of not fasting, create the action of not being kind, create the action of killing, of murder in them. And that wrong action, he's going to punish them for. So they said, simple. The way to square the circle is human beings are the creators of their actions. Human beings create their actions. Yeah, but the Quran says Allah created you and what you do. And if human beings are the creators of their action, are we saying there's more than one khaliq, more than one creator? Because to believe that there is more than one creator in the obvious sense is kufr, is disbelief. So the scholars, and understand this, here are the Sahaba, the scholars from the Sahaba, and they vary in their knowledge. And they have students. From the students' time, we have this term from the mouth of Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, that orthodoxy is Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Okay? Look into Tafsir Ibn Kathir, Tafsir Tabari, on the verse that some faces will be beaming bright. And Ibn Abbas says they are the people of Sunnah and the Jama'ah. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And who are, and the people, and then some people on that day, their faces will be darkened. They are Ahlul Bid'ah wal Hawa. Or Ahlul Hawa. There's two or three narrations. People of whims and desires and deviations. So we have this idea of the people of orthodoxy, Sunnah and Jama'ah. From that time, these people who the Mu'tazilites weren't amongst them, they said, whoa, what are you saying? That man creates his own actions. That's kufr. It goes against the Quran. Yeah, but, and their response was, yeah, but we have to say that, otherwise we've got another difficulty, which is that if Allah creates the actions, and then He creates the action to do wrong as well as right, and He punishes the wrong, then, and man doesn't have a choice, and that's the only way out, to say that man has created his own action. Their argument is more sophisticated than that, but that's in a nutshell. So the scholars reacted to that vehemently. One, the Mu'tazilites were considered to be outside of orthodoxy, deviant Muslims, and that's the position held ever since. And two, they had to reply with some type of response. Now that I've said you're wrong, it doesn't behove me to say you're wrong and I just walk away. Now I have to kind of explain to you why you're wrong. So there became at least 3 answers that claimed orthodoxy to this. Okay? And you'll see why, even though I believe that I know my Aqidah stuff quite well, theology, and I've studied with a number of people and I've read a number of books, you know, over 20 odd years, mashallah, but I actually don't like it beyond the simple level, because I find that a lot of what I've already studied, to date, there are things that I've read and known in books of Aqidah that hasn't once been mentioned by me, because I don't find where it's munasib, suitable, because it's not one of those things that helps you to go to the grave. So here's one of those things that I believe doesn't help you go to the grave, but we're going to do it anyway. First view of the Asharis. It doesn't matter if you don't know them. A theological school that ascribe to Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, Muslim orthodoxies, use rational arguments, especially to refute the Mu'tazilite. They say, look, Allah is omnibenevolent. He is all just, all good. He doesn't compel and then punish you for doing the wrong action. No. Yet, at the same time, man himself is not the independent creator of his own action. Because there's only one Khaliq. We don't have a Manichaean worldview, good, God of good, God of evil, or things done independently of God. Okay? Which is why to believe in theistic evolution, which is what the Second Vatican Council from 1960 onwards subscribed to, and which many Muslim, Jew and Christian scientists, and especially if in genetics or in genetic evolution, many of them ascribe to, but they also probably don't know their Aqidah very well, to believe that Allah created the mechanism of evolution. Okay? Allah created the mechanisms of evolution. And then just step back and let the evolution clock unwind by itself. It's kufr, because no action can take place except with the will of God. It's okay if you're a Christian, apparently, or certain Christian theologies accept that, because they say, look, the Ash'ari, the Sunni Ash'aris, they say, when the Quran says Allah created everything, it means everything. You blinked, Allah created that. An atom decayed, Allah created that. An electron fell out of an orbit of that atom, Allah created that. In fact, they went so far as to say, just to show that Allah's omnipotence, Allah's all-powerfulness, that Allah is all-powerful, He is the creator. They say fire doesn't have any intrinsic ability to burn. Fire doesn't have any innate ability to burn. But somehow, when certain things meet fire, wood, paper, Allah, at that instance, causes burning to happen. Not because of an intrinsic property in fire, but because Allah is the creator of everything. That's how they squared it. But then another group of theologians came along, adhering to Ahl Sunnah, Sunni Islam, and said, yeah, but that kind of makes the whole of creation a bit robotic. They say, no, because we say, they actually say, what happens is, man, he acquires his action, kasbi. That Allah, there is, and this is what they say there is a qudra muhdatha. There is a kind of contingent power that Allah puts in a human being, which is not absolute. When he intends to do a deed, a good deed or a bad deed, and Allah creates that in him in that instant, and therefore he is responsible for his actions. But that is, in a nutshell, part of Ash'ari Sunni theology. Ibn Taymiyyah comes along and says, no, that's kind of like, that's just inventing something. Qudra muhdatha, this contingent thing. It's either Allah or not. By the time he fleshes out his argument, it looks like he does exactly the same thing, but from another angle. So he says, no, this qudra muhdatha, that you don't have the action, but at the time that you intend to do the action, Allah somehow creates the ability in you, which is of you, kasbi, to do the action. He said, no, that's just kind of fiddling the texts. And that fire doesn't burn, but that when the paper comes in the fire, and then at that instant, that's fiddling the text. He goes, actually, with regards to fire, for example, Allah has created a type of ability in the fire to burn. So that when it comes close to certain things or in contact with certain things, it burns. That's the way you explain it. But the rest of them say, oh, so this thing that Allah created intrinsically in the fire, is that independent of Allah or dependent on Allah? Ibn Taymiyyah will have to answer, is it dependent on Allah? So when is it dependent on Allah? So did Allah just put it there and left it alone? That means on its own it's doing something. If you say it's doing something on its own, away from Allah, then you're saying that there's an absolute power other than Allah. And if you're saying that Allah is at every moment helping the fire along, then you're not saying anything different than we are. You're just using different terminologies. And then the Maturidis have a different way. They use certain different terminology. Why to answer this question? The question is simple. The response is so difficult that things that I'm saying are not mentioned in one sentence or two. Ibn Taymiyyah spends a volume on this. Al-Juwayni spends a volume on this. Al-Ghazali fleshes it out over 2 or 3 books. Al-Razi just fills his tafsir with this to the max, and these are great intellectual giants, but they still can't get it down into 2 sentences. Why? Because it's something that actually you're not going to square the circle. And the reason why they are doing it is not because they're wasting your time or their time, or that they're godless. Na'udhu it's just that they feel that Islam needs to present to the wider world a rational justification that frees Allah of the blame of being of compelling people and punishing them, and affirms that Allah is all-powerful and nothing escapes His power. But the method of trying to justify all that is just the human mind and and you're trying to guess God. So this is why the view of the Salaf, the attitude of the early Muslim scholars is just this. Look, we know that Allah creates actions. We know man is responsible for his action. Whatever happens in between, we don't really care. And sorry, O Persian, O Byzantine, O non-Muslim, that's the best answer we could give you. For some people, that's going to be more than enough. But for other people who are nurtured on rationalism, maybe some of the rational justifications will at least make them understand, oh, Islam has an answer for this as well. That's the reason why. So for most of us, we will never come across this, and we will never need this. And we will never need to look into the argument. But if you're in a position with Alex, okay, then he's going to have, which is the normative position of a Muslim, which is engaging the non-Muslim society. Engaging the non-Muslim society on all the various levels. And if we're saying that Islam is true and is haqq, then human beings understand haqq should have some type of justification of being haqq. And that's what the theologians, the scholars of Aqeedah and Kalam have tried to do. But they have tried to do it in various degrees of success, but in ways that is well beyond the common people, and actually well beyond the common people from the non-Muslims. So all it is in some cases, we still have to pull back and say that there are just some things about divinity, Godhood, that are just never going to be known. But what I can assure you as a Muslim is that we have been told explicitly in the Quran and the Hadith, Allah is just and He doesn't compel human beings. And we've also been told in the same revelation, Allah is the creator of everything. if you can, especially if he's a man of science, okay, if you can accept the quantum weirdness of an electron going through two slits without dividing and without becoming two at the same time, and that you just accept it, then just accept something even greater for God. Otherwise, qudra muhdatha, qudra musahhaha, which is Ibn Taymiyyah's one, qudra musahha, this complementary sound qudra, which is something that put into fire. So, for a long time I used to believe the fire, Allah put an intrinsic quality into it, such that by nature fire burns. It doesn't burn by itself, it burns by the permission of God. Allah put something into it. And then just one brother came to me in one of the classes many years ago and said, okay, so Abu Ali, do you believe that this fire, this quality, this nature of fire is something that God is creating at every instant? And I said, no. One time he created it, just put it there, and now anytime fire comes in contact with wood, burning takes place. He goes, so something is happening without God's power. I said, no, nothing happens without God's power. He goes, but you just said, I said, yeah. I said, hold on a minute. And then I realized, oh, hold on, there's another way to see this. Then he told me what he believes. I said, oh, so you're saying that actually we don't have any choice and the fire doesn't have any ability, anything. It's just like a dead object. He goes, no, everything has kind of a life to do. I said, yeah, but you just said at every single instant. So you can find holes and flaws in both arguments, okay, if you really pushed hard enough. But one is going to be closer to the truth in expression. And majority have gone for the Ash'ari view. But all I'm trying to say is, remember the detail. This doesn't, because we did the basic beliefs already. If you didn't know any of this and you never even understood it, it has no impact on your faith, your iman whatsoever. But some scholars are going to have to address this.
Sorry, I would like to interrupt you at this stage because maybe it needs a bit more reflection on it at this stage. Because you are mentioning fire, so it takes me back to Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam.
Yeah.
So the fire has the intrinsic quality of burning, and it's been given that intrinsic quality of burning from God Almighty. And it says, and we asked the fire not to burn Ibrahim. So the order was sent to the fire through the angels that you are not going to burn. So the intrinsic quality of the fire to burn is there. But then came the order not to injure our Ibrahim.
Simple. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi will use that as a proof for qudra musahhaha, okay? And which is what I was brought up, and that was one of the main proofs, okay? But then the counter proof is, first and foremost, there are so many verses in the Quran that tells you that Allah is the sole creator. And it's not just creating man and animals and donkeys and fish, it's creating everything. Even the ability to move, not move, think, not think, be, not be. Right, so that's, no one denies that. So when it comes to the fire, the Ash'aris will say, if you say that there is an intrinsic quality that from God, but it actually is burning without actually Allah at that moment creating the ability to burn, then burning is happening without Allah creating the ability at that instant. Rather than say no, we're not trying to justify or not. I just want people to understand what the basic rationale is. And this rationale is the dominant view of Sunni Islam. It was only really greatly differed with, at least in an explicit form, by Ibn Taymiyyah and others, okay, even though maybe the early Salaf didn't agree with it, but the point is we don't have anything from them on this. It's what the great intellectual minds, the Ghazalis, the Juwaynis, the Nawawis and the Razis, have kind of agreed to in one form or the other, because it best fits all of the proofs. Otherwise, they say, it's a type of shirk. To believe, they say, if you take Ash'ari theology, time itself is not something that just goes on. It's created by God.
But time is in sequence to the motion of the earth against other planets.
Not necessarily.
As far as the man on the earth is concerned.
Yeah, that's man on the earth. But we're talking about something even beyond that.
Yeah,
okay.
There
so, because why? I mean, again, just if you study quantum physics, okay, there is something called Planck's time, which is 10 to the minus 43 seconds. There is nothing physically conceivable that can be less than Planck's time. It's an impossibility. That means time, just like photons, come in packets, come in quanta. That's a new discovery, which was like, 1920s, 1930s. It came off the back of quantum theory in the 1900s. If time comes in packets, in discrete packets, which is the dominant view of scientists today, it's not clear-cut because you don't see it, okay, and you can't measure it like photons and electrons, but we know they come in quanta. Time comes in quanta, in discrete packets of nothing less than 10 to the minus 43 seconds. The implications of that is that actually somehow packets of time, as tiny as they are, 10 to the minus 43 seconds, are being created constantly. Ash'aris will come along if they know quantum
this
physics
is for
and say,
you. This is for human being, the time creation. For Allah, there is no time.
yeah, but we're not talking about for Allah. This is nothing is for Allah in that sense. We're just talking about the universe. So there's nothing for, not even qadr applies to Allah. So this is, Allah is out of it. All we're saying is, the Ash'ari, the argument that Allah creates everything and nothing can happen except that at every single millisecond, millisecond, Allah is creating. When Allah is a creator, Allah is creating now. And He's not just creating a few thousand things. He's creating everything. So when this atom joins with this atom, He's created that, and He's created the movement. And when at any big thing, small things, Allah, nothing happens or exists without the will and the creative act of Allah. It is so fundamental in the Quran that when it comes to the Ibrahim alayhi salam's be call, this is, the explanation is, just like Allah says to the angels who come after Asr and they go back up to heaven, and Allah asks them, what were my servants doing? This is a way of Allah just respecting the person or the situation. Because Allah already knows, but yet He asks, what are my servants doing? And then the angel says to Allah, oh, they're doing this. The angels don't say, but God, you already know. They tell Him what they were doing, but Allah knows. So when be called to the fire, it's somehow saying that the fire had some intrinsic property, which is one reading. No, it's just one way of Allah honouring the situation, not negating, not saying that it has an intrinsic property. And that tafsir is a tafsir of, if you went to Qurtubi, if you went to Baghawi, and if you went to most tafsir books, and if they touch upon that, that's probably what they would say. Why? Because it's an Ash'ari. But Ibn Taymiyyah doesn't negate that. He just says, but that just seems to render us so motionless. But that's not a logical view, that's more of an emotional view. He could be right, but he could be wrong. But bottom line is, no Muslim is required to know this depth. It's just that sometimes when we have to get into arguments with Christian theologians, or atheists, or just as Alex did, then we might need to present something, but we certainly couldn't present this level, because it's just too much. So this is why when we went through the easy stuff at the beginning, that's all a Muslim is meant to know. The simple belief of the Salaf, and if you wanted to just have it a little bit more sophisticated, no more, no less, this is this is the best book that you're ever likely to read in Creed. The Aqeedah of Ahl Sunnah by Imam Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi. So let me just read the statements, and then we can leave this bit and leave it for any question. What was it? So let's be clear. We're not trying to justify one view over the other. We're not even encouraging to get into this because, as I said at the beginning, I don't believe this has any value of that amal, those actions which will help you in the grave. However, they are not rubbish. It's not a rubbish subject or topic. It's a religious, highly religious, important topic. It's just important to certain situations and certain scholars. Okay, so that we can rationalize and speak in the universal language of aql to those outside of our religious tradition, but we're always second guessing the mind of God and the act of God, which we should have the humility to say, you know what, this is how I've written it and rationalized it, but hey, we're talking about the unseen, and we're talking about Allah, so who knows? the end has to be Wallahu A'lam. The true theologian, even after he writes this, he says Wallahu A'lam.
So I think I'm not sure, but I think I'm going to bring a scenario which happened, which we have to follow to Hadith. When the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu went to Jerusalem, and all the mockery in Makkah then, those who are mocking, they were mocking, say, "Oh, Abu Bakr, do you see what your friend said?" And he said, "If he says so, I believe it." I think we have to come from that point of view, that if this is in the Quran and it's, Allah knows what you do, this, then we have to believe you. We've got no choice.
Brother Salam, the issue is not if it's in the Quran we have to believe it. No one has denied that, not even the Mu'tazilites.
Yeah, I know.
The issue is how do we explain it and reconcile
exactly,
verses?
I'm coming to that. If we try to question it, it has to get to the point where we have to stop. Because if we don't stop, we go back again. If we have weak iman, and then we get ourselves confused.
So that's why
yes.
the Prophet ﷺ says, and this is the third time we've mentioned it,
yes.
when qadr is mentioned, withhold from speaking about it. Not withhold completely, but withhold when it gets too complicated and you begin to scratch your head or even have doubts about what's going on. Just stick with that basic message of Islam, that Allah has willed and decreed everything, including our rizq and whatever, and Allah knows, but we have a choice and we're going to be responsible for what we do. And we act as if nothing has been recorded, not our belief, act as nothing, so that we are responsible moral agents, and we don't just say that, well, if food is written for me, it will come to me and I'm just sitting there with my hands kind of just tied to my back. No, I have to actually then get a decent education, to get on my bike and have to go and find a job. But all of that is part of the means. That's all we're saying. It's a matter of squaring. Just like the Prophet ﷺ drank water standing up, Zamzam, Bukhari. And in Sahih Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ forbade drinking water standing up. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr, when he drank water standing up, he put his finger in his mouth to vomit it out. So, two statements. No one is saying don't follow the sunnah. Follow the sunnah. But what exactly is a sunnah? Can you drink water standing up? Or can you not drink water standing up? So, one group of scholars say, no. The prohibition takes precedence over anything else that you might have heard or said the Prophet do or say. So, it's not permissible to drink water standing up. That's a minority view, but it's justified from the fact that the Prophet forbade it, and Abu Bakr went and vomited whatever he had. The other view is that actually it's preferred to sit down and drink,
but it's not haram.
But it's permissible to stand up. Better to sit down, permitted to stand up. And you have harmonized both texts. So it's always a way of how do you reconcile or make tarjih. At the theological aqidah level, that's exactly what's happening here. You have Allah is the creator of, Allah created you and what you do. But then does that mean we have free will or no free will? If it says no free will, we are compelled, then that's a bit unfair, because then we also get punished for things that are beyond our control. No, since Allah is omnibenevolent, He's all good, okay, and He's all just, okay, then we can't be punished for something beyond our control. So if we are punished, it's because we chose to do something wrong. We had a free will and free choice. But that doesn't negate Allah is the creator of everything, and nothing happens without His will. And that's all we have to know. And that is what they call the attitude of the Salaf. You might have heard this word Salafi, leaving that. But just the Salaf is more tangible. The Salaf refer to the early Muslim scholars and their way, which was, you know what, we know that people are using rational theology, and we can see that there's going to be benefit in there, but actually in the end you're talking about God. And you're not going to be able to square, in some things you're not going to be able to reconcile. So just be content with what the book and the sunnah says and stop at that point and don't walk any further. That is a methodology in Aqidah adopted by many scholars, but not all scholars. It's the Aqidah methodology that I adopt and that I teach. But it's not the methodology that most scholars for the last 1,000 years have adopted. They have actually tried to answer it.
There was a small experience that I had. I was up somewhere north, and it was a three faiths sort of meeting, and a Christian came up to me. He was a evangelist and took up his Bible and started reading some passages. He said, but you have a theory of predestination. Everything is destined. So how do you reconcile that with man's ability to take decisions and be responsible for his actions? Because you say man is responsible for his deeds, because that's what I was saying to him, that we are responsible for our actions and deeds in this world, and there is a day of judgment on which we will have to account for our actions. Said, but you've got the system of predestination. So if everything is predestined for you, so you shouldn't be responsible for it. Why should you be responsible for it? Because something has been predestined for it. So there comes that argument where how far you are going to be able to go into defending an action when you are talking to a non-Muslim and describing your accountability in terms of the predestination. The ayah that talks about in the Quran, I think it's in the early surahs, which is the definition of the Iman, and the Surah Baqarah. It stops. It doesn't mentions the word بقدر خيره وشره. This you find in the Hadith.
No, you find in other ayats.
But not in the continuity of
that particular verse in Surah Baqarah, that specific verse.
Does not mention
bir is man amana billahi, that one. Yeah, but there are many other verses. If you want, I could read a few here about Qadr. But Qadr is actually not hadithic; it's actually Quranic, and then it's also hadith. But it's actually in the Quran. Qadr.
The concept of Qadr is there.
But the word Qadr as well in that context.
He added on to that particular ayah.
Oh, yeah, all right, okay.
Yeah, that's an addition, which you find when you read Iman Mujammal in our Mujmal, in our books that we read or teach to children. That's added on as part of the ayah when you're reading how your Iman is complete. And these are the major composites of that. So in that's Qadr Khairihi wa Sharihi is added on. Whereas in that particular ayah it is not there. So
okay, that's true.
How do you reconcile when you are arguing that point with a non-Muslim about the accountability against predestination?
Okay, let me just sum that up. One of the probably the most difficult topic for any religion that bases its belief on a singular, God, Allah, has always been what they call in Western philosophy and theology, theodicy. The nature of an all-good God, but the presence of evil existing. That's one. And tied to that is the issue of compulsion, non-compulsion. Does man choose or not? It's kind of tied. So the whole idea of qadr, of predestiny, and of theodicy, the idea of all-good God and yet evil being present, is the hardest issue in theology, in that it equally applies to Islam as it does Christianity, as it does Judaism, as it does whatever other thing. And it's, alhamdulillah, it's one of those rare views that you can't really get a satisfactory solution, I think. Okay? I mean, people are satisfied at different levels. Most Muslims are satisfied with just the basic, and alhamdulillah, rida bil qada, mashallah. But I'm talking about at an intellectual satisfactory level. It's because it's just one way of Allah telling us that, look, your rational capabilities can't extend and encompass me. Behave yourself. However, Allah is merciful that it's very few issues that are like this, that you can't actually get an intellectual satisfying answer. Otherwise, a lot of theology you can in Islam, and so much of the Islamic law you can, the maqasid and the wisdoms and the ta'leel behind them. So I don't want us to think that that God's divine laws and beliefs are purposeless and are so confounding that they demand blind faith. But there are one or two places out of 1,000 or 10,000 that demand blind faith, and I believe qadr and theodicy is one of those issues. Because in my experience, as much as you'll try to explain it to a Jewish person or a Christian person, okay, especially if they have been only taught to look at it one way, they will never get to understand what you're saying. Or if they're a tabula rasa, a blank slate, they need to be those type of human beings that can actually see two sides of the same coin at the same time. And most human beings, irrespective of who they are, tend to only, it's binary. They can see it that way or they can see it that way, but they can't see it both ways. So they can't see, many people will find it incredibly difficult if you tell them, look, actually God creates everything and yet we have a free choice. Immediately what comes into the mind is that's a logical fallacy. But actually in the system of logic, in syllogism, it's actually not a logical fallacy. But actually in people's perception, that seems to be a contradiction. It actually isn't a contradiction. But it's something that human beings find incredibly difficult to square. So when qadr is mentioned, withhold from speaking. Yeah. And all we say to the non-Muslim in this case is, you're going to have to believe me, Dad, that I assure you that the Quran is clear that God creates everything and He is a God of good, and yet man is has a choice in what he does or doesn't do, and he'll be accountable based upon that choice. And that's all we have to know. And and one more thing. When the Prophet says, repel qadr with dua, it's not saying that something can actually repel qadr, because it's been written. It's written in stone, or in this case, the Lawh al-Mahfuz. All it means is, don't resign yourself to what you think is your fate. Do the spiritual, religious thing that wards off the harm, because you don't know what your fate is. So be righteous. And that's why Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani radiallahu anhu says, it is upon a believer to fight qadr. It is upon a believer to fight qadr. Oh, what's fighting qadr? All he meant was, if you feel that you're like, I always give these examples, it's the only one I can think of. I sneeze now, like that. And then I sneeze again. And then Dr. Salim, he's like, Dr. Ears coming there, oh, yeah, Abu Aliyah, he seems like he's getting a cold, snow and all these wet outside or whatever. Okay, so he's getting a cold. So he says to me, wrap up warm, put muffs over your ears and whatever, do what, and then go out, when you get home, make dua, take some lemsip. Okay, what he wants me to do is he wants me to fight qadr. Not, because the qadr could be that I could get a cold, and qadr could be that I won't get a cold. Yeah. But let's assume that since I've sneezed, that's an indication that I'm likely to get a cold. That's how human experience works. So fight qadr in that sense. Don't say, well, Allah decreed I'm going to get a cold, so I just go out in my t-shirt, right? Because, if I'm going to get a cold, I'm going to get a cold. No. If you're going to get a cold, you're going to get a cold. But say that after it happened. Because after it happened, you know what your qadr was. Before it happened, the paths of man are numerous. And no one knows the divine decree except the one who knows it. Allah Jalla wa Ala. Khalas. And that's the spiritual thing of the believer. And I wanted to do this just to show our scholars have gone out of their way to do something solid. And I've summarized certain views, okay? But they have spent pages and hours. And in fact, it was not hours. You have a whole scholarly chain of understanding it the Ash'ari way, understanding it the Maturidi way. And you don't have so many scholarly chains, but you have Ibn Taymiyyah, one or two scholars trying to understand it this way. And even Ibn Taymiyyah's contemporaries like Dhahabi were saying, leave it alone, Ibn Taymiyyah. Just leave it alone. They've done it, and whether they're wrong or right, but actually the beauty is alaykum bi athar min as-salaf. Cling to the way of the Salaf, even if people abandon you. And stop where they stopped. We're talking about in Aqidah. Because there's a simple beauty about it, and most of us won't be pushed to that kind of level. You have to explain a square in the circle. But Alex, the non-Muslim world, they have rights to some kind of answers. It's just in theodicy and qadr, it's the most difficult ones to do. And that's not a fault within the Islamic tradition. That's just a sir min asrarillah.
It's better to stop it here. It should not continue.
No, it's something that can be understood, brother. It's not because we are arguing, because... Sorry,
just 1 minute. So, like Brother Alex was asking, when to fight with the, or argue with the non-Muslims.
He's trying to explain.
Yeah, actually, as a matter of fact, when you go to the non-Muslims, you don't make them understand with the Quranic ayah, or you don't tell them about Iman. So, you can, with Aql, with other logics, you try to bring him to Iman, and once he is on the boat of Iman, then there is no question of explaining and going into details.
No doubt at all that in this case, this will be the way to make them accept, if they're not believers in God, the oneness of God, and if they are, to make them accept the finality of the Prophet and the authority of the Quran. And once they accept those 2 or 3 things, khalas, anything and everything in there is going to be accepted, no doubt at all. But when you get an individual question out of that framework, then either you say, I don't know, and say that, but that doesn't mean Islam doesn't have an answer, or you say Islam doesn't have an answer. That second answer is a very problematic thing to say. And we have to look at it from a teacher point of view, from a, you know, as a religious teacher, from a wider perspective, that these things have to have answers. But for the 99% of human beings, including non-Muslims, it probably, probably doesn't. You can bypass that for so many ways, because it's like you said, you bring them back to something which is much more rationally explainable in your fitrah, in your innate being, in your inner being. It makes sense that there has to be a creator of creation. It makes sense that, you know, that there is a divine being that created. But it's not in your fitrah to square the circle of qadr.
You see, Sheikh Aliyah, it's when you translate qadr into predestined.
Remember, you asked for this detail, yeah?
Yes, absolutely. When you translate qadr to predestined, as brother, I'm forgetting your name. I'm so sorry. That's terrible, isn't it? Thank you, Qaisar. Brother Qaisar, when you say predestiny, yeah, then you've got a contradiction. When you say predestined and free will, you've definitely got a contradiction of terms. But when you take it as a whole, like I said, knowledge, Allah has knowledge of. Allah does everything. In other words, like when commonly said, a leaf falls. It needs Allah's permission, otherwise it will not fall. Not because it's a deciduous tree, no, because Allah allows it to happen. So if we take it as a whole and say for anything and every action, like the example I gave, if I wish to punch Dr. Salim, which I don't, by the way, I don't use that, yeah, I can do all the intention, I can start walking out, but at the last moment, if Allah doesn't want it, it will not happen.
No doubt at all, but brother, we're
but
missing.
That's your decision. If you don't want to punch him, that's your decision. That's your free will.
Yeah, no, he's not denying that. But there's something basic in his question, which is there are certain terms or words or modes of expression that cloud the matter.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So let's stop there. We can't get away from that. We're going to have to use a word or a phrase one way or the other. Because in the end, it's a simple matter of, did Allah know beforehand that we would be discussing this today?
Yes.
Did he know yesterday, or did he know in pre-eternity? You know, did he always know?
He always knew.
Right, he always knows. And did he write down this thing about meeting today in that always knowledge that he had?
Yes.
Right, okay. That always know is always known, okay? The word for that, okay, is predestiny, or in Arabic, they could say qadr or azaliyah, ilm azaliyah. It doesn't matter how you use the word, qadr or ilm azaliyah, or destiny or predestiny, or foreordainment or preordainment or prejudgment or pre-written decree, or in the end, some of those words, Arabic or English, will be more pleasing to some listeners' ears than the other. My thing is, if I see a particular set of scholars, Muslim scholars who have thorough knowledge in Islamic Aqidah, but they also have a good understanding of Western intellectual tradition in philosophy and theology, and they tend to use a word, or dominant discourses in theology use the same word, I'll probably incline towards that, so that we don't have to use different terms. However, the disadvantage and the advantage of that is at least we're talking about the same terms. The disadvantage is, as a Muslim, my sense of predestiny is very different than quite often Anglican Christianity. or perhaps even liberal or Reform Judaism, or maybe even mainstream Judaism. So what happens is the term has a, which is why Ibn Taymiyyah has an insistence, try to stick to the Arabic language, okay? But the point being is, when you then talking English, you can say qadr all the way, and then khalas, whatever you understand. But qadr is from the idea of measuring. Taqdeer. Miqdar. Absolutely. And there is a measuring and a portioning. It doesn't matter how you have the concept, you're going to always have to use certain words.
The closer they are. Sorry, what I'm saying about you, as soon as you turn around and say, look, you have free will. Man has been given free will. There's absolutely no doubt about it. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Nobody can be held for their good or for their bad. This is quite simple. I mean, we don't even need to go into that. You've been given free will. You've definitely been given free will. Otherwise, chuck everything away.
Can't be done like that.
It can't be done.
No,
Therefore,
no,
once you've been given free will,
yeah.
you cannot say that Allah is destined for you to do that. No,
Okay, the reason why we have to say that is because most of mankind, including Christianity today, including much of Judaism today, but definitely most of mankind from Mushrikun and other, even if they have believed in God, they have somehow believed that there are certain things that you can do independent of God's will and creative action. And that had entered into Islam in the earliest days. And so the scholars have a method, which is, once an innovation has, it's the innovation of the Mu'tazilism, okay, that they say that that the af'alul ibad, the actions of people, they're created by themselves. Okay, we create our own actions. Because we are free. We have free choice. Therefore, we freely create our actions. Therefore, we are the creator of our actions. That's how it entered in. And what the scholars do is they say, well, look, the whole concept is wrong. The rationalizing is wrong. It goes against various verses of the Quran. Whenever we talk about qadr, since it's understandable, people might believe that. So many Christians believe that. So many Jewish people believe that today. And so many educated Muslims, especially if they're scientifically educated, believe that because they can't believe anything else. We need to say, no, you know what? This is taking away something from the uluhiyah of Allah and the rububiyyah of Allah, from the lordship of God, because God is the creator of everything. And it's not that the Quran says it once or twice, it goes after its way to say it a number of times. And ma shallah can, wa ma lam yashal lam yakun. Whatever he wills happens, whatever he doesn't will doesn't happen. And it just goes out, or it will use another expression, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, or it will tell you, nahnu fuqara, or antum al-fuqara, nahnu ghaniyul hamid, you know, wallahu huwa al-ghaniyul hamid. It will say the same kind of realities in different ways, because it just wants the human being to know, God is just Allah Akbar, subhanallah. We are not talking about something so trivial. And God is, because Allah is Allah, He is deserving of worship because He is Allah.
Absolutely. So there's no doubt
Okay.
in the greatness of Allah.
Sorry,
it does not actually diffuse that at all. Like, for
But I
example, when I
point,
studied Darwin's theory of evolution back in my biology days, it didn't take me away from Islam.
It just
enhanced
intrinsic, yeah, absolutely.
It got me for it. If I studied biochemistry, for example, again, it was towards Allah, not away from Allah.
If you go to the Three-Face Forum as an example,
we talk about that individually.
let me just finish this point.
9:30,
But let me just finish this point. If you go to the Three-Face Forum,
no more question after that.
if you go to the Three-Face Forum and you speak to some of the Jewish and Christian participants, I'm talking about those who are educated, you know, so the rabbi or whatever, you'll find that actually many of them will believe that actually we do have, of course, we all share in the free will aspect. No so-called Abrahamic tradition would disagree, but you'll find two of the Abrahamic traditions. Probably the majority of you amongst them will be that actually we do create our own actions, and for Islam that's kufr. It's not wrong; it's kufr. A person who believes it as a Muslim, he's falling into kufr. If he continues to believe it after the proofs have been established in, it takes him outside of the faith.
It's saying whether you create your own actions or you're saying you're responsible for your own
No,
actions.
no, I'm using the word create your own actions.
So when
No one
differs.
differs.
And kill somebody,
Did you create that action or did Allah?
Allah.
so
Did you create that action or did Allah?
how is the court going to blame
The court
human
doesn't.
mind.
The court doesn't bring God into it.
That's what I'm going to say. And in
The court
Islamic
doesn't-
society,
Yeah.
what is my defense then? I'm not talking about a secular society. In an Islamic
You don't have a
society,
defence. You've killed somebody, you've committed an offence.
an offence which is
Free will.
proscribed.
So
proscribed.
let me get even clearer than that. If a Muslim kills someone for no reason, let's just say, and he's sent to court, okay, he'll be convicted of murder. If that same Muslim says, you know, I just did it, bit of fun, or whatever, you know, he'll be convicted for murder and probably have a really bad reputation. What kind of man is this? If that same Muslim says, and I also believe that Allah is not the creator of my wrong actions. He creates in me the act of fasting and praying and dhikr, but he doesn't create in me the act of murder, adultery, or drinking wine. That person, before he'll be executed for murder, will be executed for apostasy. And the act of denying that Allah is the creator of creation and everything that you do is worse than the act of murder. So here, because we're just talking about Aqidah, and because in the wider world there are Muslims, I haven't met 5, I haven't met 10, I haven't met 50, I have probably met hundreds of men and women, Muslim men and women, some who are highly educated, some who are just, mashallah, lay Muslims. And more than 100 people I've met over 15, 20 years, okay, I might have even met more before, but I wasn't aware of this issue. They hold a belief which is wholly wrong and close to kufr, but it's not their fault. They are surrounded by an environment, okay, that kind of doesn't make it clear. Now, this is a religious circle. It has to be stated in clear religious terms. It doesn't matter how we square it, because remember what I said, even if we don't understand any of this, but we understood the first 20 minutes of Allah is the creator of our actions, Allah knows everything, Allah has written everything, and whatever Allah wills happens, whatever Allah doesn't will doesn't happen. That's on one side, and that doesn't contradict that man has a free choice and he's responsible for his actions. And how whatever happens in the middle, it doesn't matter iman-wise. Then, as long as we know that, that's fine. But this is a case of, you want details, this is the kind of details our scholars have gone into. And it's a scholarly thing, it's not an emotional thing. So you haven't seen me giving you emotional arguments. These are scholarly. And I just wanted to show you why I believe, right, that going, here's going to be a bit, it might sound a bit arrogant, but I've been a teacher for 20 years. I've taught Muslims and non-Muslims. And generally, mashallah, by the grace and mercy of Allah, most people consider me to be quite a good teacher in terms of explaining concepts. That's not just praises from non-Muslims and whatever, but then non-Muslims hardly meet people who can speak proper English, but actually from my teachers and scholars who sometimes in a circle get me to explain the point, though they're far more knowledgeable than I am and I will ever be, because there are certain ways of, and I have just grown up to think of what's the best way of explaining. And because I have mixed with, you know, lay people streetwise and academics, bi'idhnillah, over time I've learnt to do this. So when I say that when we go through the 40 hadith, I'd rather go through it this way, like we did the first 3 hadiths, it's not coming from a desire of stifling you from research. It's just coming from a desire that you, like myself, are just really responsible for taking enough solid knowledge away so that we can do the right actions to get to the grave and just fly to Allah. And there are people who have known me since 18, 19 years and say, Abu Ali, how comes you don't speak about Aqidah like you do? You know, and you're quite silent about it, and you always talk about this fluffy spirituality stuff. I say, in the end, because, okay, much of Aqidah, beyond Iman Billahi wa Malaikatihi wa Kutubihi, a few things like punishment of the grave, and in the end, if you just wanted a sound Aqidah, it's Aqidah Tahawiyah, okay? Just khalas, that's the text that you read once a year, and then you read once a year and you read once a year. You don't need an explanation, you don't, because most of those are Quranic verses just simplified in nice sentences. And it has become the most acceptable Aqidah text of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah since the last 1,000 years, 1,200 years, when it was written by Abu Ja'far al-Tahawi, almost ittifaqan by the scholars, all right? So, mashallah, for those who want. But if those who don't want, and they just remembered Iman Mujmal, and if they can remember a little bit about Iman Mufassal, the Iman in a bit of detail, Amantu billahi kama huwa bi asmahi wa sifati, I can't even remember all of it, but it was whatever. Fine, alhamdulillah, you know what? That's all you need. Then we need to just do the actions, and then we need to internalize those actions. My thing is, I hardly ever go through this, because I find that it doesn't have the required benefit in the grave or in the hereafter. But when we're between scholars and whatever, or students of knowledge, then this is the right thing, that students of knowledge, it befits bi'idhnillah Salim and me to go back and say, well, the Maturidi say this, but Ashari say, because khalas, that's the maqam that we're in, bi'idhnillah, that Allah has given us as students of knowledge. But it doesn't befit me or him to bring this into a khutbah, except at the basic level. Or except if someone has a doubt, then you have to clear it, or except with non-Muslims. So when I teach, I was always impressed by those words, and I've tried to live by them. Himmatul ulama, ar-ri'aya, wa himmatul sufaha, ar-riwaya. Imam al-Hasan al-Basri says, the concern of the scholar is to shepherd and to nurture and to cultivate. The concern of the foolish is just to narrate. I've gone through my foolish stage. I hope that Allah, some time ago, have taken me out and continues taking me out. But you come to a realization that it's not the knowledge, it's also what you teach and how much you give, where and when. There's a bit of subjectivity. For these circles, I would have preferred to do not that depth, and if I have to step it up only a little, or keep it exactly as I was doing, with one or two issues going into detail. Abortion, it's not that the Muslim community don't have abortions, we have probably 20 abortions in just IG, in just East London, probably every evening. Okay, so those things are fine, but others are not. So just remember, Aqeedah, think twice, be clear that you're not required to stretch the circle, but have confidence in your past scholars that they were intellectual giants, intellectual giants. And just to begin to understand, I thank Allah that I begin to understand what they say. I can't tell you what one is right, wrong, or whatever. But I begin to understand, you know what, that is a grace from God as well. But it's not a grace that everyone requires to know. Why? Because everyone's not required to be academic. Okay?
I think I disagree with everyone. It's not required to be academics.
No, we're not.
Depends how much you're going to work at it.
No, don't.
I think the knowledge is there. I think maybe we here now, we're too old to start. If we start as early as you are, maybe we will be. We don't know.
But would it get me to the grave in a better way?
Well, Allah.
We need to be clear on that. Hadith number 5, next week, which is the hadith on bid'ah.
I always give the example of, I've watched Lawrence of Arabia. Seriously, Dr. Salim? No, seriously. I've watched Lawrence of Arabia, so I know what the ending is. Yeah? It's as simple as that. You're making more complicated than it is. No, I'm serious. Please don't. Because at the end of the day, Allah has knowledge of everything.
Sorry,
Finished. So that's an easy way of explaining to the layman as
I can't read it there.
Then
If
go
I
into
switch it off from
detail
here,
like this, then of course we know who creates it.
So
Allah is
rewind
the creator.
some of
Allah-
it.
Otherwise, what are we doing in the mosque?
Can somebody...
Please don't make it more complicated than it is. And you know,
Does somebody help with the
it's a big.
Can you? No. They said if you they said if you switch it off from here, it rewinds a certain portion back.
There is a button.
So can you see the button? I can't see the button. Go further. I can't see the button. That's why I was asking. There is a button up there. He told me, but I couldn't see anything. My glasses on. Same thing as you.
I have to take mine off as well.
Yeah.
Is it off now? Have a look.
The red light. The red light should go. It should stop recording.
Right, hang on.